I've lived the perfect life, I guess, when it comes to my work. I get to come to the yard every day and, whether that's fixing the field or working with a kid or talking to a scout or a coach in the U.S. or it's crazy.
Welcome to episode 171 of Alberta Dugout Stories, the podcast. I'm Joe McFarland. The Canadian College Baseball Conference kicks off its first spring season since 2019 this weekend. The 2020 season was turfed, of course, in the initial aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic, and the logistics of the 2021 season meant they would have to wait for another day. And that day has finally come for those Western Canadian college teams, including Prairie Baseball Academy. At the center of that program is Todd Hubka, who has seen it all since joining in 1996, first as an assistant coach to Blair Kubicek, before taking the reins in 2010. He and I actually share the same hometowns, originally being from Carmangay, then going to high school in Claresholm. We randomly crossed paths again while he was coaching the Lethbridge Bulls, while I was a young reporter in Medicine Hat. We've been able to share a few laughs over text and phone calls over the years, so it was only a matter of time before we had him on the podcast. We got the chance to talk about his upbringing, including throwing a no-hitter in high school, his coaching philosophies, and his expectations of his young PBA club this spring. Todd, thanks so much for joining us here on the podcast.
So it's always a privilege, and I appreciate you having us on here.
It's been a long time coming, but the CCBC is back to regular scheduled programming. How excited are you personally to finally get things back going again?
Yeah, you know what? It's been a crazy 2 years, and it's been a long 2 years and a frustrating 2 years, and but it's hopefully behind us now, and we can move forward with playing some baseball games and looking forward to the team that we have this year and competing for a CCBC championship again. So, and I think we have the team to do it this year. So
let's talk a little bit about that team you've assembled. What are you expecting out of this year's squad?
Yeah, you know what? Because of COVID, we only have, I think there's, 3 guys on our team that have played, college baseball games, leading into this year. So we're really young, and but I also think we're really athletic, and I think as the season keeps going here, I think we're just going to keep getting better and better every weekend, and I think we're strong on the mound. I think defensively, I think this is one of the best defensive infields we've ever had at Prairie Baseball in the 27 years that we've been doing this, and. So if the pitchers, if they could just throw strike one for us, we can really field the ball behind them. So, really like the team this year.
Mm-hmm. This might be like picking favorite children at this point, but any guys you think will be turning some heads this season, fans maybe should be keeping an eye on?
Yeah, I really, we have a right-handed arm. He's actually out of Calgary. That's a young kid here his name's Aiden Newton, that he came here as an outfielder in the fall, and we've been watching him for a few years and staying on him, and he committed to us, and had a good talk with him in the fall, and our thoughts were if you need to move to the mound, and I think he can play college baseball at the in the outfield, but professionally, I really think has a chance to play professional baseball on the mound, and he agreed, and it's been some ups and downs so far this spring with him, but it's a very, very good arm, and as we keep going here, he'll figure things out, and it's a very exciting arm. He's low 90s with a chance of even getting better as he keeps growing and getting bigger. There's a lot of room there for him to grow, and defensively and offensively, I think that we got a real young group that, to name just one or two, I don't know if I could do that. I just like our team as a whole. Like they're, 1 through 9, I think we can hit, and I really think we can defend this year. So I'm not playing a favorite, Joe.
Fair enough. When you look at this team, though, and you and I were talking off air about this, is when you have those 2 years of ups and downs, you're constantly thinking about the development part. How excited are you about the opportunity to finally get back to that part of the game? It's less about the wins and losses almost, but seeing these players and athletes develop into what they can become.
Yeah, you know what? I think the developing part, we've been doing a good job of that. It's you mentioned the wins and losses, and that's the part um, that we need to figure out down here. I think developing, to where these kids are today. We've had that opportunity because we haven't got to play games, and we've been in the weight room and getting bigger and stronger, and and in the batting cages and all that sort of stuff. But it's the how to win games, those close games, and what it takes to win it at the college level is what we've been missing the last 2 years. And that's the part that hopefully our coaching staff down here can figure out and teach these kids that it's one thing to to hit in a cage or throw bullpens or whatever, but it's a heck of a lot different when you're out on the field in the springtime and trying to win games. And I think we're going to get there with that. It's just, we just really have no leadership because we've really had no one in that position that on our varsity team that have gone through it. And, but we're going to get there. We're talented enough that we'll get there. And if we don't, it's on us coaches. So.
Do you have any expectations of yourself as a coach and as a coaching group, especially coming out of a pandemic where a lot of these guys, as you mentioned, are kind of trying to get their feet back under them and might have some, whether it's early struggles on the mental side of the game or just trying to figure themselves out physically? Do you change your mindset a little bit as a coach?
Yeah, I think this, you mentioned the mental side, and I think that's been the biggest, working with the kids the last 2 years. And you know what? Maybe not even mentally on the baseball field, but just mentally, going to school and just their lives in general have been turned upside down, like all of ours have. But to try to find that to help them get through some of this crap that we've gone through in the last 2 years is, it's almost nice that they get to come to the baseball field and forget about all that crap and mentally just all they have to think about is the baseball end of things. But it's been an interesting 2 years when it comes to even the off-field stuff. But mentally on the baseball field, I think it's just it's kind of our approach down here that you work hard and you have that blue collar approach that the mental aspect will take care of itself, and by just taking care of working and getting better each day. So
let's go back in time for a while here. You're a Southern Alberta guy, born and raised, played your youth ball in Claresholm. Tell us a bit about the baseball scene growing up along that Highway 2 corridor.
that's a few years ago. It's interesting. I think it was, my dates might be wrong here, but I'll do my best here. I think it was like 1984, 1983, 1984. The American Legion baseball was Fort McLeod was trying to form an American Legion program, and at that time I was 13, 14 years old, and so before that it was basically just Little League baseball, where back then you played 20 games and that was a big season for playing baseball, and so back then it was pretty exciting living in Claresholm that Fort McLeod was trying to start this team. And I had the good fortune of, when I was 14 years old, that I tried out for the Legion team, and there was me and a couple other 14-year-olds that made it. And that's kind of where I started to fall in love with the game, was those first couple of years with the Fort McLeod Royals. So and the good thing was they hired the head coach, who was Reed Spencer, who was actually a school teacher in Claresholm where I went to school. So, I got to know Reed pretty well through just being in classroom with him. But Yeah, that's a few years ago, Joe.
Well, and he mentioned Reed Spencer, and he may have taught me computer class as well. So this goes into the connection that Todd and I have. Who got you into baseball in the first place? How did you get into baseball in the first place? Was anyone really instrumental in pushing you in that direction?
You know what? It's where you grew up, and that's where my roots were, was Carmangay, Alberta, and it just happened to be that all the farmers out there, uh, they played slow pitch every summer, and went to all the small town tournaments, Picture Butte, Carmangay, Barons, Champion, and I always just followed my dad when I was 4 years old or whatever, and there was another kid my age, his name was Warren Shear, that uh, they would go out and play, and we would just grab our gloves, and I mean, we'd throw a baseball for 2 hours straight. Just that's kind of where I started playing baseball, was just following my dad around to slow pitch tournaments. And the Carmangay didn't really have much baseball for young kids in Little League or anything like that, and I really didn't get involved with organized baseball until I moved to Claresholm in 1980, and started playing some house league, Little League there, along with some all-star baseball. So, but yeah, it was. I mean, my dad loved baseball growing up. He coached teams back in I guess in the '60s, and yeah, I just fell in love with it.
Did you grow up hearing those stories of the old circuits that came through Claresholm, Granham, Vulcan, Carmangay, and the names and the folklore that came with those circuits back in the day?
You know what? I was pretty young at the time, and I did, not really, but I got to witness those fields, the Granham field that was just east of town, and the Carmangay field that was just north of town, and with same with Champion and stuff and Barons. Like that my dad played slow pitch on all those fields, and those were some. I heard my dad talk about the old days when they'd bring in guys from the U.S. to come up and play, but I didn't really get into it that much, other than some of the players that played up here, like probably the biggest one was like Pat Gillick type thing, that that I think he played with the Granham White Sox, and I'm not sure what Vulcan's team was, but I think he spent some time in Vulcan one summer too. So.
Yeah, that was exactly where I was getting to. Is I remember the name that always stuck out to me when Dad was telling stories was Willie Velasco, was sort of the ringer that was always brought in, and it sent me down this rabbit hole where eventually Alberta Dugout Stories was created. So it's amazing how that all comes full circle. When it comes to growing up and wanting to be a ball player eventually, did you have anyone who you were idolizing on the professional scale? Was there a team that you were always cheering for?
Well, I think back then it was the Los Angeles Dodgers, and again, who my dad that's who my dad's team was. So of course, that's who I fell in love with. But back then you didn't get to watch them like you do today. Like you might catch a game every Sunday or something like that, or when playoffs rolled around. But the old follow the box scores in the newspaper, or listen to scores in the morning to find out how the Dodgers were doing. And those were the Steve Garvey, Ron Say, like those guys, that Mike Scioscia, like all those old guys that I remember, Dad always talking about them. But so I didn't really, because of back then there was, I had 3 TV channels, and and they were all local channels. You didn't have your Sportsnet and TSN back then, so you didn't really get opportunities to watch those guys play. But that I guess my mentor, that where I started to fall in love with the game, would like really fall into love with the game, was my second last year with the Fort Macleod Royals, the American Legion program, when they hired Rocky Musgraves to come up here and coach. And his passion for the game is where I started really to fall in love with it, and how much the game meant to him, and just how much it passed even into his normal life. And that's where even to this day, some of his beliefs are the things I believe in with the game, like
Hmm.
the game teaches you more than just the game. And I truly believe that. And, I'd run through a wall for that man. So
Very cool. I was reading a few articles, and it appears you threw a no-hitter back in 1988 with the Willow Creek Composite High School Cobras. I'm curious, do you remember that game at all?
no, I don't. Who was it against? I'm curious. What high school was that against?
You
Does
know
it
what?
say
I
anything
didn't
on it?
dive into that one, but I do have a few other details for you. You ended up winning the game 3-1. You gave up 4 walks in the first inning before retiring every batter afterwards, and you also hit a home run in that game as well. And that seemed to be a pretty common thing that you did, was you helped your own cause because obviously there was no DH back then. So the pitchers were batting and you were doing pretty well on both sides of the field. So from that standpoint, was that something that you always prided yourself on, was being kind of one of those all-around good ball players?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, back in the day, I thought I threw pretty hard, but as you go into coaching and everything, you realize, I was a pie thrower, soft lefty. So, but back then, I was a very competitive kid at anything I did, whether it was, you know, playing marbles on the side or shooting pool or whatever. It was always about, I wanted to win at all
Hmm.
costs. And back then, when I especially the with the Fort McLeod Royals, like, I went up as a pitcher, a left-handed pitcher to throw for them. But um, my love, I still my love is hitting, and um, but I think I was a pretty all-round good baseball player. I could play the out. I was a left-handed thrower, so
Hmm.
I was stuck in either the outfield or first base. So, but yeah, I could hold my own on the mound, and I could hit a little bit. So.
Hmm. Well, obviously, and you did well enough that you ended up going to North Idaho College. You were an all-conference player at that. You mentioned the fact that you look back on it and you were a pie thrower, but I'm curious nowadays, how would you scout yourself as a ball player?
Oh wow, good question. Um, yeah, I would definitely scout myself as a hitter. That's I enough that I think I could throw and get people out at the college level, and I did. Like I remember I think I threw about 4 or 5 games down in college just because in the early spring or whatever you run into some tournament play and everyone's on pitch counts and stuff like that, and so I'd go in, and if I told coach if he needed an arm or whatever that I could go in and throw, and I did quite well. I could get guys out, but um, I always hit in the middle of the lineup. Even in college, I'd hit 3, 4 for whatever team I ever played on, and I I just I felt like my best was a hitter. I had a short, quick swing, and velocity never scared me, and but yeah, that's how I would scout myself as he can hit at any level type thing. So
Very cool. You went straight into coaching from there. Was that a conscious decision, or was there an opportunity that you found you just couldn't pass up to go that route?
you know what, and I talked about Rocky a little earlier there, and I think that's where I started to, if there was ever an opportunity to coach, I would love to do it. And I spent one summer out in with the Oyen Pronghorns, and Rocky was actually coaching that team, and we ended up winning it was called the SMBL back
Hmm.
then, and we had a really good team back then, and that's when the Prairie Baseball Academy was starting to rev up, and they went through their first year, and Doug Jones is from Oyen or whatever, and
Hmm.
and he talked to me and said, do you think you'd be interested in coaching? I said, well, yeah, I think I would be. And so after the season or whatever, I went to Lethbridge and stopped at Coach Kubicek's house, and had about an hour conversation with him about joining the Prairie Baseball and start coaching. And that's 27 years ago that we had that talk, and I'm glad we did. It's pretty neat when you can go through life with never having to work a day in your life. So, and that's how I look at it. When you're passionate about something, you can't wait to get up in the morning and get going. So
What was it about that program in the early days that made you think, you know what, this is the place I want to go?
I think because at the beginning, we didn't have a baseball field, we didn't have a facility, and we really didn't have anything. Our first couple of years or whatever, we'd rent out a strip mall building and set up a hitting cage in there, and where you could get one hitting cage in, and we'd run camps and run our 40 guys through there, and have a little weight room somewhere stuffed up in the corner there, and it was, and the vision of everyone that was involved back then with Coach Kuby and Keith Jorgensen, Doug Jones, Rick Pascal, to keep this thing going and growing it. And it seemed in those early years that every year, there was something new coming, whether that was, Lloyd Nolan Yard or just getting the better players as the program kept growing. And, and you kind of fall in love with the process of what every new year is bringing. And it was, pretty incredible what those gentlemen built down here in the mid 90s, late 90s, and how far it's come to this day of what we have down here.
I was going to ask about that side of it, is when you look back at 1995, 96 and the bare bones that you had versus what you have today. How crazy is it to kind of look back and have that hindsight 2020 thing working for you?
Yeah, like it's pretty like I wish the kids could see what where this program was 25 years ago, and to where it's come today, and how much baseball has grown in this community. And I firmly believe without Prairie Baseball Academy, I really don't think you have the Vauxhall Academies, the Okotoks Academies, the academies up in Edmonton. And I think it was kind of Prairie Baseball has helped grow baseball in this province immensely. And Alberta is a powerhouse in Canada now for baseball, and I truly believe PBA has a big part of that. And and that's we don't see a lot of those players because they're moving on to Division I schools and everything. But I truly believe without Prairie Baseball, baseball wouldn't be where it's at in this province.
And you've certainly been a central piece in a lot of what's developed here, including being the first coach of the Lethbridge Bulls, for example. And reading some of the archives there, those were some interesting times in what was originally, as you mentioned, the SMBL and then the WMBL. You even got to play a little bit. I remember actually working in Medicine Hat covering the team, and you and Greg Morrison both had to suit up because of a shortage of arms, a shortage of bats. Kind of an interesting time, to say the very least. What was it like trying to get back into it just to fill a void?
Yeah, those years your rosters were, I think we probably had about 18 guys is all on our rosters. And if we played in a tournament or whatever, and back then it wasn't, I remember we went to, I think it was Yorkton or something, and played in a tournament during our league, in the middle of our league, and we're playing in a tournament and the kids need a break or whatever on the mound or whatever. So yeah, I remember suiting up a few times and playing. And I think that first year or second year I coached too, we got to the end of the year and basically I lost my whole pitching staff because they had to get back to school. And we're playing Moose Jaw in the final, and there's no arms left, so I ended up throwing the final against Moose Jaw. And it's that league has grown quite a bit since those days, but I enjoyed it. I'm competitive. I gave her all I had. So, but I tell you what, I couldn't lift my arm for a few days after those outings.
Like you've had such incredible success, whether it's with PBA, you've won CCBC championships, you've moved players along to bigger and better things. You've virtually seen it all. When looking back on it, what are you most proud of?
Yeah, I think the alumni. I think when you see where the kids that you coached in the early days and where they're at today and how successful they are, whether it's their own business or working for large companies, or or just how great they are as dads and everything is something that we're always so excited to follow the social media on Facebook and Instagram on all that, and just follow our alumni. And that's and right now I believe we have 3 players in our program that I coach their dads. And it just shows how much this Prairie baseball has grown in the 20 some years, and how strong our alumni are. And this weekend we just had our banquet, and we reached out to our alumni just to buy dinners for the boys, and it was awesome. We ended up having, I think, between 150 and 160 dinners were bought by our alumni for the banquet that night. And that's something that I know Coach Kubicek is really proud of, and it's something that I'm really proud of too.
What's it meant to you to be able to give back to the baseball community like you have year after year, with whether it be PBA or anywhere else in Southern Alberta?
Yeah, you know what? As I get older, like my kids have grown and all that, and I spent a lot of years in the summer chase after I was done coaching in the coaching the Bulls. I stopped because I was missing a lot of family time in the summertime, and then I started coaching them, and those were some fun years coaching those young kids and watching them grow as kids and players, and to see where those kids are today. Like there's my 9-year-old team that I had with my one team, I think there's 7 guys that are still playing college baseball. So that's pretty exciting, and I enjoyed those years. Those were some of the best years on a baseball field. We're not on the PBA field, but on those little league fields, teaching those young guys how to play the game the right way.
You've mentioned Kubi a couple of times now, and I wanted to get just some straight up thoughts from you on the man that you ended up replacing. You were his right-hand man for quite a while, and then you became coach of that program. What has he meant to you and to the baseball scene in Alberta?
Yeah, you know what? I'll even go back to the beginning of Prairie baseball, and I mentioned my other mentor, Rocky, which I mean, he was pretty big Southern Alberta baseball guy back in the day with the Fort McLeod Royals, where they won a couple, regional championships. And I know Rocky applied for the Prairie Baseball Academy job too. That in I think it's '94, right, when they did all the interviews or whatever, and he didn't get it, and Coach Kubicek got the job, and I was disappointed at how could they ever not hire Rocky. Like, he's the best guy that I know on a baseball field. Like, that's crazy. And and then after that first year or whatever, I joined PBA and got to know Coach Kubicek, and and I've told this to Coach Kubicek, I said it to Rocky too. I said they hired the right guy, and his passion for baseball and for growing the game, and without him, I truly believe we wouldn't have Lloyd Nolan Yard. I don't think we'd have our indoor, and Prairie Baseball Academy wouldn't be where it's at today without the early Coach Kubicek and what he meant to the program. And baseball through and through, that man, and very passionate, and one of the most frank guys I've ever met in my life, where if he was disappointed in you, he'd tell you right away, and if he was mad at you, he'd tell you right away. But also 20 minutes later, it was water under the bridge, and it was time to move forward. And those are that's probably one of the biggest traits I took from him. Is it's okay to be mad at someone, but it's also you can't sit there and dwell and be upset with someone for a couple days. Like, let's move on. And that's one thing that even to this day, if the kids probably get a crack out of it, but if I'm a little upset on the baseball field and yelling and screaming at them, and all of a sudden 5 minutes later I'm having a quiet conversation with them in the dugout, and they're probably going, okay, what the hell's this guy playing mind games with me or something, but that's just, I got that from coach, and it's show passion, but also show that, you care about these kids the other way. And that was Coach Kubi.
You've said some really kind words about Coach Kubi. I'm curious, what do you hope players say about you as they come out of it and look, 25 years, 2020 hindsight? What do you hope your legacy is as a coach?
You know what? I hope it's similar to what, the kids talk about Coach Kubicek, and that's that I cared, and not just about baseball cared, but like just, in life in general cared, that I wanted to follow them after PBA and on how they're doing, and know that I was passionate about this game, and know that I pushed them, because I loved them, not because I was a hard ass coach or anything. It was because I wanted the best out of them. And, another good point on Coach Kubi was, if you're not yelling at a kid and you're quiet to a kid and you never show that, that side of you to a kid, then it's probably you don't think much of that kid. Mm-hmm. And, I think that when you show passion and show that you care and, want to push a kid, whether, that's, give them a hug, but also, if that's a little bit of kick in the butt too, I think that's what these kids need. And, I hope that they see that, me pushing them was, to get the best out of them. And 25 years from now, I hope that's what they see.
Pretend I'm a first-year guy coming into one of your camps. What's the number one piece of advice you're giving me if I've got a dream to live a life in baseball?
Ooh, good question, Joe. For Prairie Baseball Academy, and this might not be for everybody, but for Prairie Baseball Academy, come in here with the attitude of that you're going to outwork the guy beside you. You're going to spend the extra hours in the weight room, that you're going to spend the extra hours in the batting cage, that, that academics come first. And, those are the guys that have success, are the ones that, if, a lot of times, you go home at night and then I forgot something at work and I come back and it's 9:30 at night and there's two guys hitting in the cage upstairs, those are the guys that have success, are the ones that put the time in. And, if you come in here to Prairie Baseball with that approach, that you're going to outwork people beside you, you're going to have success. And you know what? Hopefully you have success on the baseball field, but for sure you'll have success in life.
Final question for you here. What does the game of baseball mean to you?
You know what? It's been my life for 27 years, even longer than that. I mean, I'm just talking coaching, and, it's part of who I am. It's part of who my family is. My family knows that, a lot of times baseball has to come first, and because of the position I'm in, and I've had and they understand that and have supported me through all these years. And, I don't, it's crazy. I've lived the perfect life, I guess, when it comes to my work. I get to come to the yard every day and whether that's fixing the field or working with a kid or talking to a scout or a coach in the US, or it's crazy that, there's a handful of us in Canada that get to do that. And I'm one of them. And, I'm so grateful that I've had that opportunity, and I'm glad that Coach Kubicek saw that in me 26 years ago, or however many years ago that was. And, and hopefully I'm here for a few more years anyway, before I, retire. But it's a way of life, and I wouldn't want anything else.
Well, we are definitely grateful for your time as well, Todd. Absolute pleasure. Congratulations on everything you've accomplished to this point. Continued success this season and beyond with PBA. Thank you so much for sharing some of your stories and joining us here on the podcast.
Joe, I appreciate it, and I love listening to your guys' podcasts. They're awesome. The Logan one, I listened to that one the other day. That was awesome. And you guys are growing this game like you have no idea. And what you guys do for these young athletes and these programs is a true blessing. And keep doing it. You guys are doing a great job.
Thanks again to Todd Hubka for joining us this week, and thanks to all of you for downloading and listening. If you haven't already, leave us a rating and review on your podcast app to help spread the word about us. We'd also like to take a moment to thank our Platinum supporters. The Okotoks Dogs are getting closer and closer to opening day in late May. They'll also be hosting the WCBL All-Star Game in July and are, of course, looking forward to another run for a league championship. You can check them out at dogsbaseball.ca. And AHP Academy has begun playing their spring games against other programs around the province. They have a jam-packed schedule with the goal of helping young athletes in the Edmonton area get to the next level. Head over to ahpbaseball.com for more. Until next time, thank you for all your support, no matter the platform, of Alberta Dugout Stories.